the screen behind me. Also, please can you ensure that your mobile phones are switched to silent, and councillors, and I'm the worst of this actually, can I please remind you to speak directly into the microphone and make sure that your card is pressed firmly into the console. Members of the public, of which we have many tonight, very good. I would like to say that as a committee, we understand that the matters under consideration tonight can be emotive. However, please be respectful of those around you in the public gallery and the committee and refrain from any booing, cheering or any other form of disturbance. So now we move on to the business. But before we do so, I'd like everybody to introduce themselves around the table. Barry? Barry? Introduce yourself.
Mr. Chairman, Barry Devlin, Planning Solicitor.
Chris French, Area Team Leader.
Chris Turner, Planning Officer.
Patrick Arthurs, Deputy Development Manager.
Flo Taylor, Planning Officer.
Carl Houston, Planning Officer.
Here you go.
Councillor John Rabini, Vice Chairman.
David Beeman, Chairman.
Chris Berry, Interim Head of Planning and Economic Development.
Fiona Cameron, Democratic Services Manager.
Minutes. I ask the committee to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of August. Are they okay? Agreed? Start.
All members present and correct.
Okay. What's your interests?
Thank you, Chairman. I've had one declaration from Councillor Kika Miralis, who has submitted a personal objection to the application A1 land at 24 Burnt Hill Road and will therefore withdraw from the meeting and take no part in that item.
Councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I must declare a non-pecuniary advantage over WA 20182161. Mr. David Seal, I've known him for some years and we work closely together.
Yes, I'd also like to declare, I know Mr. Seal just as a person, a friend actually, and I'd also like to declare I also know Mr. Asson, who is one of my constituents in the castle. By members of the public, Fiona, have you received questions from members of the public?
Thank you, Chairman. We've received questions from Mr. Aston, Mr. Brigg and Mrs. Lentz, and their questions and responses and the responses provided by planning and legal officers are set out on the updates report and were sent to the correspondence on Monday evening along with members of the committee.
Could I ask whether since they're in the audience, did you receive those answers, please? Yes, okay. It's not generally our practice to ask for supplementary questions, but you have received answers, yeah? Okay, thank you very much. To government guidance or legislation since the last meeting?
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. Yes, there is one update to the planning practice guidance. Updated guidance was issued on the 27th of July 2019 on the habitat regulations. This is available on the National Planning Policy Guidance website. The update is to clarify the effect of the recent European case law on the habitat regulations in relation to appropriate assessments. This will be dealt with in full with in a briefing with the committee members, which is being arranged by officers at the moment. However, it's important to note that Waverley did already update its approach in line with the recent case law, so procedures are already in place that match that new guidance. Thank you, Chairman.
I think I'm right in saying that meeting will probably be in October, yeah? Probably. Okay, right, before we move on to the main business, you probably noticed there's been some slight changes in the reports. And I'd like Chris Berry here, as acting interim planning manager, just to give a brief...
Thank you, Chairman. I did take just a minute at the previous committee to explain that over the last few weeks we've been looking at the committee reports, and I hope you'll notice that they are significantly shorter than they have been in the past. It seemed to be that they got to a stage where there was additional information that wasn't directly relevant or necessary in some cases. Policies that have already been are already well known were repeated on many occasions, and the whole aim of our look again at the committee reports is so that the messages are clearer, the issues that are appropriate for the decisions on which you are about, the decisions you're about to make are much clearer. So there is a summary at the beginning of the report, I hope you notice, that identifies the issues for your consideration and the impacts. And we've hopefully made those clearer for you so that both members understand which areas they can consider when making their decision, and it allows us as officers to be rather clearer in the guidance that we can give you. So I'm hoping that you've noticed the difference in the reports. We had a bit of an outing on it in the committee before, and I have to say it seemed to work. It seemed to work much better. I might say that this is also a work in progress, so we would be delighted to have your comments on the basis of the way the reports are presently developed. And if you have any amendments, anything that you'd like to bring us to attention, ways in which you think we can improve them still further, then we'd be delighted to hear from you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. I'd also like to add, we've got quite a full agenda tonight in the sense of ahead of us, so I would like, if possible, if most people could sort of wrap all the questions up in one sort of session rather than having continued debate, that'd be helpful to us. Anyway, we'll move on. Applications for Planning Permission. There were members of the committee visited the sites at 24 Burnt Hill Road and River Lane on Monday afternoon, yesterday afternoon. In the event of site inspections being necessary as a result of considering the applications at this meeting, they will be held on Monday the 14th of October 2019 at a time to be agreed at the meeting. Okay, right, kick off. First one is application subject to public speaking, which is 2018-2161, land to the rear of Talbot Lodge, 24 Burnt Hill Road, Recklesham, GU104RR, a proposal to erect a dwelling with access from Burnt Hill Way. And the case officer is Chris Turner, who I'll ask to present.
Thank you, Chair. The site's located to the south of Burnt Hill Road and to the northeast of Burnt Hill Way. It comprises part of the rear garden of number 24 Talbot Lodge. The residential dwellings are located to the northeast southwest of the site. To the west of the site is Brideway number 41, which runs from Sandrock Hill Road to the south, along Burnt Hill Way up to Burnt Hill Road to the north. The Brideway narrows adjacent to number 30 Burnt Hill Way and then narrows further beyond number 35 Burnt Hill Way, which is here. The aerial photograph and location plan demonstrate the relationship to the immediate adjoining neighbours. 26 Burnt Hill Road to the east sits lower than the proposal site, and so does number 37 to the northwest, and the host dwelling to the north. Number 35 is located slightly higher than the proposal site. The block plan demonstrates the orientation of the building in relation to the surrounding properties. I've put two block plans on the slide. The block plan on the right-hand side was the one which I circulated at the committee site meeting to demonstrate the relationship better with number 26 Burnt Hill Road than the previous block plan. There was a typo in the committee report which referred to the separation distance between 26 Burnt Hill Road and the proposal site as being 41 metres. That has been amended on the update sheet, and that is 31 metres. The tracking plan demonstrates how a vehicle would be able to enter and exit the site in a forward gear and has been considered and approved by Surrey County Council. The following four photographs show the proposal site itself. Photograph A is looking towards a host dwelling to the north. Photograph B is looking south towards Burnt Hill Way. Photograph C is showing the boundary with 26 Burnt Hill Road. And photograph D is looking towards a neighbour at number 35 This is where the access is proposed to the site. The following photographs show the focus on the bridleway and the existing relationship for properties along the bridleway. Photograph E in the top left, that is the proposed access to the site. Photograph F is looking south again towards Burnt Hill Way. Photograph G shows how the bridleway narrows, running west along the site to a single file footpath. And photograph H shows how the existing access to number 37 uses the bridleway. There's two additional photographs here. Photograph I shows how number 37, there's clearly bin collection takes place along this part of the bridleway. And photograph J shows how number 35 also uses the bridleway to access their property. The proposed elevations demonstrate a well-designed bungalow which would fit within the context of the site and the proposed floor plan. The matters for consideration that officers think are most relevant to members are the impact on character, the impact on residential amenity, and the access to the site. I've got a few other matters just to discuss which were raised on site. There was a question raised about emergency vehicles and access to the site. The manual for street guidance prepared by the Department for Transport requires that for fire engines to access a site, there needs to be the ability to get a pumping appliance to within 45 metres of a single family dwelling. This could be achieved from the existing access to number 35 and the distance from there to the proposal site. And then in relation to the officer's report on pages 11, I refer to the planning history of the site where there's previously been applications for dwellings which have been refused. Now, the report goes into the reasons for each of those refusals. Just to add to that, for FAR 21967, which is the oldest application, 1967, with older applications, the extent of correspondence and information available to us isn't the same as what it is on modern applications, but based on the correspondence which took place on the application where it was refused on highway grounds, it was considered that it wasn't a suitable access because two vehicles couldn't pass along the same lane. FAR 26169, which was for an outline bungalow, had a similar reason for refusal, but there was no evidence of correspondence to confirm that, so that there is an assumption to be made that that was the same reason. And then on the final application in 1996, the reason for refusal based on highways grounds was from noise and vehicular movements passing what it refers to as properties along Burnt Hill Way. It doesn't make a specific reference. Now, in relation to that, we've consulted our environmental health team, who have confirmed that vehicular movements of that associated with a single dwelling wouldn't be sufficient to raise harm to the adjacent neighbour. Yeah, thank you, Chair.
We have two people for public speaking on this particular application, and can I invite Mr. Chris Lentz, first of all, to come to when it commences, and you'll be beeped 30 seconds.
Mr. Chairman, councillors, ladies and gentlemen, we urge the council to reject this application as it goes against so much of the Farnham neighbourhood plan, including policy FNP 8, which protects the South Farnham Arcadian area from developments adversely affecting adjoining properties and the wider area. The Farnham Design Statement for the Bourne states subdivision of plots is unacceptable where it would cause harm to the semi-rural character of the area. Yet this garden grabbing will create a plot disproportionately smaller than its neighbours, with a property significantly closer to others than is currently the case. And visibility displays required by Surrey County highways will erode the area's semi-rural nature. The development's elevated position will substantially overlook its neighbours, robbing them of privacy. It will damage the ecology of this quiet and secluded valley through increased noise, traffic and light pollution. The proposed access is unsuitable, will endanger bridleway users and create noise and disturbance. The many objectors include Farnham Town Council and the Farnham Society. The ground level of this already elevated site must be raised by another metre to make the building plot level, resulting in a development that will overbear and overlook Celery Lane Cottage at 26 Burnt Hill Road, with the top of the border hedge less than a metre above the new ground level. Proposed full-length windows from floor to roof apex will have a line of sight across the main lawn and private pool at Celery Lane Cottage and views into its upstairs bathroom. These tall windows will cast light over the whole area. The suggestion that this may be mitigated by tall fencing is against advice in FNP 8 on developments in this area. Proposed access is via an unadopted privately maintained road, Bridleway 41, where no full vehicle access rights exist. Local plan policies D4 and LT11 aim to provide safe access and safeguard designated rights of way. The bridleway has no turning or passing places for 140 metres. It is heavily used by parents and children walking to local schools and the recreation ground, by cyclists and horse riders. Parking at the proposed site will be limited, with visiting vehicles unable to turn around if the spaces are occupied, which will not be apparent to drivers until it is too late because of poor sightlines. Unavoidable reversing will increase risk to bridleway users. The section of bridleway leading to the development is purported to be wide enough for vehicles, with no significant damage to hedgerows anticipated. However, the lane is so narrow at this point that cars pull in their mirrors and vehicles do cause significant damage, in forward or reverse. The width of an online shopping delivery van, including mirrors, is typically 2.4 metres. The width of the track is 2 metres at ground level. Overhanging hedges reduces further. It's too narrow to reverse with mirrors extended. Recently, a small council lorry got stuck, blocking the lane and reversing for over 100 metres, witnessed by residents alerted by the noise, swearing and disturbance. Hedges were badly damaged on both sides. Refuse collection from 37 currently involves the lorry turning and parking on the driveway of number 35. Vehicle movements over this part of the track will increase to as many daily as usually occur in a month. The surface of the track at this point is fragile, suitable only for horses and pedestrians. It will be damaged by vehicles becoming hazardous in prolonged wet weather. Previous applications were refused in part because a bridleway was deemed unsuitable for access, as we've just heard. This has not changed or been addressed in the case reports. We urge the committee to uphold the decisions relating to those 3 previous applications and refuse this one. Thank you.
We have another public speaker, Mr. Michael Connolly.
Thank you. Chairman, councillors, ladies and gentlemen, I will only address the items which have been raised by the other objector, as all the items that other aspects of this application are dealt with by the officer's report. Number 1. This application is not contrary to FNP F8, as it does not affect the amenity of neighbours. I think a site visit will show that only the rooftops of the lower houses to the north are visible, that the site is well screened by substantial fences and hedging at the moment and does not need substantial reinforcing to stop overlooking between the properties. Also, there are significant distances between the habitable windows. Many of these are at very oblique angles. I think the distances are respectively 25 metres, 31 21 metres and 19 metres, making it acceptable. However, because of the physical nature of the site, the topography and the dense planting which surrounds the site, there would not be any overlooking or unacceptable overlooking, even if the property was closer. The building has been deliberately designed so windows face away from the properties that surround it and is at low level, and the ground is not raised 1 metre to actually site the building. There have been a lot of questions regarding the road safety. Meetings were actually held with Surrey County Council with regard to this application, and they considered that access into the site was safe, that turning in the site was safe, that there are enough parking spaces, and that it is appropriate for all types of vehicles which would generally visit this type of development to enter safely and to actually exit in a forward gear. I referred to a council vehicle which may have got stuck there. That didn't have the opportunity of using the turning head which would be supplied within the site to turn. Doubtless, if that was there, it could have used it to have got out safely. There have been comments that the actual width of the access when it goes into the site are less than 2 metres. This isn't the case, as I'm sure the site visit would have pointed out, and was also considered by Surrey County Council as being an acceptable width. It is far in excess of that and is appropriate for vehicles such as shopping, delivery. In terms of the size of the site, if one actually looks at the extract there are buildings even on the top of the small location plan you can see, which have smaller areas. There are 2 immediately to the north, which have smaller site areas, and immediately to the south along Sandrock Hill and Burnt Hill Way, most of the garden sizes and overall curtilages are very much smaller than this. However, notwithstanding this, the site is visually very well enclosed, and it is our contention that the building, once completed, would be, if not invisible, but it would not detract from the general sylvan setting of the area. That's all I have to say, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Conway. Right, before I open it up to councillors, I would like to make the point that, certainly that as far one of the issues is access, and I would point out that Surrey County Council, who are the Highways Authority, have indeed said that this is quite acceptable in access terms. So that alone cannot be used as a way of refusing this application. Anyway, councillors? Oh, Sally Dixon.
Good evening. Can we go back to the photograph of the bins? Yeah. Do we actually know whether or not a bin lorry actually goes up that lane like that? I mean, does it come from the other end?
Thank you. My understanding is that the bin lorry stops outside of number 35 and the binmen themselves walk down to collect those bins from outside number 37. Now, I have discussed this with our environmental health team again in relation to the bin collections, and they were satisfied that the additional 2 bins out within proximity of those wouldn't be that arrangement could be achieved. Thank you.
Councillor Coburn.
Thank you, Chairman. I wasn't really expecting to come in quite so early, but I will in the absence of lots of other people who wish to speak first. I think this flies totally in the face of policy FMP8. When we were looking at policies, we looked very carefully at BE3, and those of us who were around long enough when BE3 had a fair amount of traction and was well respected by both councillors, members and the inspectorate, we felt that when we put in our FMP8 and redesignated, well, the actual outline's the same, we just changed the name from BE3. I have to say Arcadian wasn't my choice, but then I just was the editor-in-chief, not necessarily the person who chose the words. I'm sorry, the whole point of FMP8 is to retain very loose level of development, to retain, in fact, it mentions landscape, it mentions amenity, I grant you that, but it mentions landscape. It mentions the fact that basically any new build, and we accept some new build in here, we don't say there should be no new build, but the subdivision of plots where it changes the balance between landscape and the built form has to be considered very carefully. And I think just looking at that, to me, you can see the issue here. It's a very small plot. When you put this, we've got a bungalow, because certainly nothing else would be acceptable. The only thing would be a bungalow. I noticed in the conditions we've removed permitted development rights, but at the moment we have 3, if not 4, eyesores in the Bourne, all caused by very innovative designs that were thought to be just the bee's knees when they came in. And when they came to build them, they discovered they couldn't do it and were coming in for NMA after NMA. And I think this, personally, is not a suitable site for a development of this size and certainly any larger. The chairman's just mentioned Surrey. Surrey doesn't look at anything aesthetically. Surrey says, can you get a car in, can you get a car out, and which gear should you be in? Fine. But that's not what we're talking about. Can we see the one where you've got the cars here? I mean, you've got your car park and your turning circle. Again, to me, that just completely flies in the face of what the Arcadian area is supposed to preserve, which is to keep very discreet entrances and exits. We don't have, well, we try not to have lavish gates in the Bourne. We do try and find, we like to be discreet in the Bourne. We like hedges, we like little pokey bits where you get your car in. This, to me, you know, once you start putting this form of development, I think it's quite cramped on the site. I agree we've had less cramped areas, but given that we're in an area here that is supposed to be protecting larger sites, I think to put a house there and then to have this sort of parking and your turning bit, so again, more tarmac or whatever it's going to be, and I'm sorry, I don't see how this doesn't sort of fly in the face of FMP8. I find it very, very difficult to say anyone can argue that it fits in with it. I think it's inappropriate. I do think it will harm the neighbours' amenity, mainly because of the destruction. I agree with you, there's not a great deal on the site that's going to be destroyed. It's very much a football pitch, but that really is not the case, not the sort of relevant matter. It's the amount of built form, the amount of hard standing, a very urbanised entrance to make it safe. I presume it'll have to be, if you want to splay, you're going to have to open up and make it look sort of safe. And I'm sorry, I honestly don't see how this can be considered acceptable.
In my defence, Councillor Coleman, I was just saying Surrey County Council and Highways is an issue. Yes? I wasn't going on anything else, okay? Oh, thank you very much. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. I noticed from the documents, having been consulted by the planning officers, Surrey County Council's Countryside Access Office objects to the application because it is an offence to drive a vehicle on a public bridleway without lawful authority. The applicant's plot of land in question used to belong to number 26 Burnt Hill Road. However, that property is accessed via Celery Lane. There is nothing to suggest the new development would have lawful right to access via the public bridleway. I understand the officers state that this is a civil matter, but I think it would be wrong to approve planning permission without this vital issue being resolved beforehand. The applicant should demonstrate they enjoy the rights to gain access to the development before the application is considered. So the committee may wish to consider deferring this application for a period to allow the applicant to do this. Thank you.
Oh no, I'm alive again. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for that brilliant introduction. I have to say I support every word that the noble councillor on my right has said, so I won't go through them again. I don't think this is the right place for this at all. And The English language is really quite a descriptive tool. It has avenues, alleys, roads, squares, and bridleways. And bridleways, strangely enough, have something to do with horses. And the idea of granting permission for people to build houses on bridleways just flies in the face of the English language, apart from normal common sense. And cars trundling down this bridleway will indubitably eventually ruin the bridleway for its intended purpose of, strangely enough, people riding horses. So for all the reasons outlined by Councillor Coburn, and for the fact that because someone else has an entrance off a bridleway at some time or another, although I gather it's not used very often, I don't believe there is any reason for this to be granted. You know, we want to keep bridleways, we want to keep alleyways, we don't want to convert them into avenues. So, no thank you very much. Unless I hear something vastly different, I think the Town's Council objection is well phrased, and I shall be giving that a lot of weight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hunt.
Yeah, the house that's just to the sort of southeast, southwest on the block plan, that's accessed through Burnt Hill Way, is that right? That's the one on the right?
Yes,
is that correct?
Photograph
so
J.
how much further up there is the new development?
Just give me a second.
Isn't it on that plan?
It's approximately 35 metres.
Okay. And is the house that's on the right-hand photo, the entrance, the path leading up there, is that designated as a bridleway as well, still?
So all along Burnt Hill Way
is all a bridleway?
Is all a bridleway.
Okay, so the access to the other house is through a that's the existing house there is accessed via a bridleway?
Yes.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Actually, did Councillor Blisham have a question before me? I did, after you. No, you called for it first.
Sorry. Good evening. This is a well-used bridleway. It's used by lots of pedestrians, it's used by people on horses, and from there it narrows considerably, and you'd have real trouble getting a car down there and turning off it as well. And because it's rather like a tractorway where you've got two-wheel tracks and grass in the middle, it will get muddy and mushed up in no time, and this will certainly become rather unsafe for pedestrians, particularly parents with children who take their children along there to school. And I think this is a mistake building along there because there's enough building there already. Thank you.
Councillor Hess, your turn.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Chris, Planning Officer, if he's got any evidence of right of access. That's the first part of my question.
Thank you. In terms of the right of access over a bridleway, that doesn't fall under planning regulations. That is under a separate regime. I think Barry can explain.
Councillor Hess, I think the position is a bridleway can be lawfully used by a vehicle. That is quite clear. Under Section 34 of the Road Traffic Act 1988, cited by Councillor Clark. Clearly this bridleway serves properties, two properties to the northern side, if it's looking north, where it's wide enough to serve vehicular access. And according to Chris, another property along this bridleway is accessed by a vehicle. Now, it seems to me that the County Rights of Way officer has written a letter at odds with the Highways Department, and their view overrides the individual view of a County Rights of Way officer. I worked in the County Council. I was a Highways and Planning solicitor, and this sometimes happens, it is clear that vehicles do and have exercised rights of access up this lane so far as is physically possible, and I accept there is a point from which it's no longer possible to get a vehicle further along the bridleway. But it's clear to the development site that vehicular access by car is possible, and within the turning movements outlined in Chris's plan, it's possible to get a vehicle back out. So, in essence, the legal position is that this is a bridleway upon which vehicular access can be lawfully used up to the point where it ceases to be wide enough to be permitted the use of a vehicle. That is the legal position.
Can I continue? Yeah, okay. So I think the objector referred to, I think, Celery Cottage, and that this property, this proposed property, would overlook it. Is Celery Cottage a two-storey house? Because I'm not quite sure from the plan drawing. I'd like to continue after that when I get the answer.
Thank you. Yes, I understand it to be a two-storey house.
Can I just carry on, please? So, I can't understand how a bungalow can overlook a two-storey house. That's the first thing. Second thing is, this site, which I visited yesterday, is really well surrounded by green trees and foliage. It's very secluded. It's a hidden site. Doesn't, quite frankly, seem to me to fly in the face of policy FNP8 totally, because it would maintain the informal rural character and well-wooded appearance of the area, would retain and reinforce trees and hedge boundaries, which are important to the character of the area. So, having seen the site, given that it's single-storey, I personally, sorry to contradict my colleagues, but I don't have a problem with it. The narrowness of the lane is due in part to the fact that the hedges are overgrown. And if they were clipped back, you'd get much better access. So, personally, I don't have a problem with it. Thank you.
Councillor Coburn wants to just come back on that.
Yes, just very briefly. I won't read you the whole of it, you'll be glad to know, but we'll read you paragraph 571. The dispersed nature of development, this is in this area, leads to pressure to develop parts of the large gardens within the area and so to subdivide existing plots or redevelop existing properties. In addition, there may be pressure for large areas of car parking or garages, but in judging such proposals, the impact of any proposal on the character of front boundaries, gardens or the street scene should be carefully assessed. In judging proposals, the fragile balance in favour of the landscape dominating the built form should be retained. And I'm sorry, I still maintain that this is contrary to policy FNP8, although I read it very badly, having put a big line around it.
Thank you, Chair. I take the point about bridle paths may allow vehicle traffic, but what about construction traffic? That to me is a different situation, a significantly different situation where a lorry might get stuck. I'm very concerned about safety access to the site.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a point of information or perhaps a query. We were talking about access to the near house on the other side of the road. If we look at page 8 of the update sheet at the bottom, it says number 37 uses its access onto Upper Bourne Lane, so we currently only experience very occasional vehicles which end up reversing, etc. So I don't think it's 100% accurate to say that number 37 uses its access off the bridle path.
Any other councillor who hasn't spoken yet? Comment? No. Do you want to say something, Patrick?
Thank you, Chair. Just really to go back to what the Chair said at the beginning, because the County Highway Authority have assessed this and have looked at the technical nature of the access to it, I'd really strongly recommend that members take that point into view And we really recommend that if you were minded to refuse it, that any technical issue such as access would not be included within that reason for refusal. I'd also remind members that within the conditions, there's a condition in relation to the boundary detailing. There's a relation in relation to the landscape detailing as well. So obviously the planners would, planning officers would certainly try and avoid that having an overly urbanisation effect, and the landscaping detailing would indeed be very sensitive, such as shingle detail as well. In relation to your point around construction vehicles accessing the site, there would be a construction management plan put in place, and that would ensure that vehicle movements into the site would be controlled and monitored in that way. So really, for me, the primary issue then falls back to the nature of the policy FMP8, and please forgive me, in relation to the impact of this single-storey development on the surrounding landscape. And as you will have seen in relation to the site visit, the site is very enclosed. Its relationship with the surrounding site is indeed a sensitive one, but is one that will not have, as officers have pointed out, an overly onerous or negative impact in terms of that landscape value. I'd ask that you would take that into consideration when you do deliberate the application.
I'm going to allow Councillor Clark as the last person to comment. And Councillor Neil. Councillor Clark first, then you.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to come back, if I may, on the question of access for construction vehicles. I notice that, in fact, it is a condition of the application being granted that the loading and unloading of plant and materials shall take place via number 24. That's on Burnt Hill Road. And no construction-related deliveries shall access via Burnt Hill Way, which is the Bridle Way. This condition should be extended to include all site operatives. Otherwise, Burnt Hill Way will become clogged up with white vans, red vans, and vans of all other colours. However, as councillors and officers who are on the site visit will be aware, this condition will not be easy to fulfil as it first seems. Access to number 24 is via a very steep driveway, followed by a gate, a series of steps, a patio leading on to the back garden. This is a construction company's worst nightmare. Furthermore, the entrance to number 24's driveway is located at the most dangerous point on Burnt Hill Road, where Upperbourne Lane intersects with Burnt Hill Road on a bend that includes a narrow bridge over the Bourne stream. During the day, Burnt Hill Road is relatively peaceful, but during peak hours it becomes busy with commuter and school-run traffic. Any stopping or parking of vehicles at this location on the road will be virtually impossible and highly dangerous. So I have no doubt there will be an intense pressure from the contractors to overturn this condition. I would urge the officers to stand firm and construct a very detailed construction transport management plan. Thank you.
Right. Last comment, Councillor Neil.
Thank you, Chairman. I find myself slightly torn on this application because I can see both sides of the argument, but I'm tending to think that if it's a well-enclosed site, which they say it is, you say it is, and it's a single-storey building, which means it should be fairly compact and shouldn't be overlooking the other buildings, and that there is access currently being used by the property to the west, which is going to be much the same access I'd have thought. I'm tending to veer on the side of supporting the officer's view.
Very much, Councillor Neil. Right. I think it's time we moved to the recommendation. The recommendation is that subject to conditions 1 to 20 and its revised recommendation, and in forms 1 to 6, permission be granted. Those in favour, please raise their hands. 1, 2, 1 to 21. 121. It's 121. Yeah. Right. 3. Against?
9.
And abstentions?
1. Okay.
Well, we have to move on to reason for refusal, yes. Now, I think it's all been made quite clear that it can't be a traffic reason, as Patrick has said. So, therefore, is anybody any specific... Well, I'll look to you, Councillor Coburn, you're judging these words.
Well, you need an alternative recommendation, don't you? And I recommend that permission should be refused.
Yeah, no,
and I'm sure I have a second.
Yeah, have you said yes? I'm choosing. Councillor Ward, seconded it. Reason? Yes, Councillor Coburn.
The application is contrary both to the spirit and the words in policy FNPs 1 and 8. We're not, I'm not bothered about the bridleway, of course I am, but the creation of the new entranceway, I think, would damage the character of that bridleway, simply because, as we saw on site, there is no way with the existing gates you can get out, you know, on a regular basis and turn the cars around. So you are inevitably creating an urbanised form at the entrance. So how we phrase that in terms, I'm not saying we shouldn't use the bridleway. I'm not arguing against that. I'm arguing against the urbanisation of the bridle path by creating the turning place for the cars on the site.
Okay. Some words? Somebody? Yes.
Yeah, so the reason, so proposing 2 reasons of refusal based on what you've said. So the proposed dwelling and the creation of an entrance by way of its site and layout would be contrary to the surrounding character and pattern of development, contrary to policy FNP 1 and FNP 8 of the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan, TD 1 of the Local Plan Part 1, and the paragraphs of the MPPF, which unfortunately I can't remember off the top of my head. And then I noticed that I can't remember who raised an issue with overlooking towards number 20. Was it Councillor Hess? You wish? Is it?
No.
Oh. Okay.
I'd leave it on.
All right.
I'd leave it on.
All right. Thank you.
Stick with the.
Yes, okay.
Yep.
Now for those in favour of refusal on those grounds, please raise the hands. And
1, 2, 3. Sorry. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's.
One.
Used on the one reason for refusal.
Yes. Um, 2019-0908, Pertry Cottage 45, Shorty's Road, Farnham, G98SH. Erection of 2 detached dwellings and associated works following demolition of existing dwelling. The case officers Flo Taylor and I'll ask. Okay. Oh, there we go.
Thank you, Chairman. This site, as outlined in red, is located to the southeast of Shortheath Road. The plot is a wide plot containing a setback bungalow which is in need of refurbishment. The area is residential in character with a mix of detached and semi-detached dwellings and flats. This aerial image shows that the site has a number of trees and the entire red line of the site is subject to an area tree preservation order, with the trees mainly to the boundaries of the site. The existing and proposed vehicular access is in the northwestern corner of the site. These are photographs of the site. Top left shows the tree frontage with Short Heath Road and the bungalow setback within the site. Top right shows the front elevation of the bungalow, and bottom left the bungalow from the rear. Bottom right shows the view from the rear of the property to the southeastern end of the garden, where the level drops down. This image, showing a block plan, shows how the two proposed dwellings would sit within the plot and relative to the surrounding development. The two detached dwellings would be sited with one in a similar location to the existing building line, with a second dwelling in a backland position to the rear. A double garage, half serving each dwelling, would be located between the two dwellings to the eastern side of the site. The proposed development would be less dense on the site than the surrounding development. Whilst there is a predominant linear pattern of development along Short Heath Road, this plan shows that there is also existing backland development to the southeast of Short Heath Road, including the row of dwellings in the southwestern corner of this image, extending from 57 and 59 Short Heath Road, and those located to the rear of the current development site. This image shows the proposed layout on site and the access and parking. There is no highways objection, subject to conditions, and the parking provision would be in accordance with the Council's parking guidelines. This plan shows the trees which would remain on the site. The trees proposed to be removed comprise 2 Norway spruces located in the northwestern corner of House 2, where I'm pointing at the moment, a cypress located in the southwestern corner of Plot 2, and some fruit trees located to the centre rear of Dwelling 1, where I'm pointing now. The beech tree located to the west of Unit 1's rear would not be removed. That's down here, the beech tree. Officers are satisfied that the proposed development would not result in material harm to neighbouring residential amenity due to the siting of the proposed dwellings relative to neighbours and the separation distances. The only potential impact which would arise would be potential overshadowing to the rear of 43 Short Heath Road's garden. And officers are satisfied that this would not result in material harm to neighbouring residential amenity, nor warrant a reason for refusal. Officers are satisfied that the proposal would not result in material harm to neighbouring residential amenity from overlooking or loss of light to habitable rooms or from being overbearing. The proposed elevations show that dwellings would be of a traditional design, taking clues from the wider area and formed of brick and tiles. Each of the dwellings would be 4-bedroom and have sufficient internal space and bedroom sizes to provide a good standard of accommodation, and each house would have its own private garden. Turning to matters for consideration, I've already mentioned the main planning considerations when going through the slides. Of additional interest in terms of the planning history and the previous refusal on the site, the refused application was also for 2 detached dwellings, but both were adjacent to each other in line with the existing forward building line, with all the parking to the front. And it's just a block plan of the previously refused scheme. The reasons for refusal related to the loss of 10 trees subject to a TPO, which would be detrimental to the visual character and amenity of the area, particularly due to the loss of a number of trees to the front of the site. There was also a biodiversity reason for refusal and failure to secure contributions to mitigate impact on the SPA. By only siting 1 dwelling to the front of the site and rearranging parking, the impact on TPOs from the current application would be reduced, with there being no need to remove trees to the front of the site. Adequate biodiversity information has been submitted with the current application to allow for relevant conditions to mitigate harm, and a unilateral undertaking has been completed in respect to the SPA. Moving to the recommendation, officers recommend that permission is granted, subject to conditions 1 to 20, as set out on pages 43 to 50 of the agenda, and informatives 1 to 10, as set out on pages 50 to 51 of the agenda, and an additional informative 11 in respect of the SIL liability from the proposed development. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. There's nobody ready to speak. Councillors, anybody wish to speak on this item? Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Chairman. Looking through this, I have a question which you could perhaps think about while I speak. You say that less trees will be taken down. How many trees subject to TPO will be removed? But moving on to what I want to say, I don't quite agree with the statement that the density of development on this will be less than the surrounding houses. It certainly isn't less than the three to the left. I have much sympathy with what the Farnham Town Council said. These buildings are pretty big when you look at the pretty pictures here. And I find overdevelopment certainly to be something that concerns me. Visual amenities of neighbours I also find concerns me, and whilst I haven't seen any splays of light, I notice that some of the neighbours are concerned that light will be restricted to their houses. I suppose overdevelopment is my main source, and also potentially the number of TPO trees going down, and the fact that these buildings just appear to me to be too large for the site. And yes, we have refused 2 houses on this before. Thank you.
Thank you. In terms of the loss of the trees, as I said in the presentation, the previous application resulted in the loss of 10 TPO trees, which were to the front of the site. This application would result in, there's 4 locations where trees would be lost. Where my mouse is now, that would be, I can't remember what's what. I did say, that it's a whole site TPO. So yes, they are TPO'd as a group rather than individually for their specific worth. Obviously, when sort of considering impact, we have to consider public amenity value, and at the frontage there's a lot more value than deeper within the site. So the 2 stars that are on top of each other are the Norway spruces. The one below that is the cypress, and near the house, the star there, near the top house to the rear, it's some fruit trees. They haven't actually given a specific number, but it's not a massive number of them. So it's considerably less than their previous application, and obviously deeper within the site, so considered less harmful. And we haven't got an objection from the Tree and Landscape Officer on this.
Right, Councillor Mowley's.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a bit to say on this, so bear with me. This development now includes another 2 buildings, with both substantial houses having garages. On page 34, it's argued that the density of dwellings per hectare for this site would be less than neighbouring ones, but those were given planning permission before harm to the environment was at the top of the nation's agenda, so I don't consider the previous neighbouring overdevelopment a yardstick to measure this one by. The proposed 2 houses are, as I said before, pretty substantial, and I would suggest at the very least there will be another 4 cars pumping out damaging CO2 emissions by their owners as they take their children to school, go to work, shop, etc., because the infrequent bus service will not be their go-to for transport. These larger houses will also need more energy to power them, using up more of the land, which right now provides habitats for wildlife identified by Surrey Wildlife. This also sustains biodiversity and what I call lung space for those in the vicinity. On page 40, it says that this development is likely to have a significant effect upon the Thames Basin Heath Spa. On page 49, one of the conditions is to actively discourage reptiles or amphibians from returning to their habitat, this limiting their ability to survive. It goes on to say, should any common reptiles or amphibians be discovered during construction, which are likely to be affected by the development, works should cease immediately, and the advice of a suitably qualified and experienced ecologist sought. Well, yes, I can really see that happening. Call me cynical, but I can't imagine a builder who sees a grass snake saying, right, down tools, lads, let's give it up. And does anybody know where we get a suitably qualified and experienced ecologist right now? No more work today. Giving money to the Sang will not help this area, which is losing much needed green space. So, I reject this application on the grounds of overdevelopment, increased pollution, and the negative impact it would have on the Thames Basin Spa, which was designated as such so that we should and could protect it. We have to marry our housing needs now with our survival. That's not being overdramatic, it is a reality, and we need to approach planning with a greater emphasis on the well-being of the environment. Thank you.
Redmonds.
When I moved to Farnham, such a long time ago, Shortheath was a beautiful road where anybody could appreciate passing through it. It has now been destroyed by on-road parking. So my main concern would be that adequate parking is placed on this development so that there's no further on-street parking. There's also an economic issue. At one time, it was easy to commute to Farnham Station. Now, commuting time is being reduced. You also have the threat of lorries, very large heavy goods lorries, moving around parked cars. There's a community safety issue. If this development is approved, it must have adequate constraints on it to make sure there's adequate parking on site and cars are not reversing across the pavement, as is currently the policy in many homes. Thank you.
Councillor Hunt.
Do you have the previous application that was rejected? Have you got an image of that to quickly compare to view?
Yeah. Sorry.
In terms of the layout.
Yeah, it's showing on the screen.
Okay, and the divide between 47 and where the new development's going to be. I'm not clear on what's going to happen to those. How is that going to look, and what's going to happen to the trees or any trees that are kind of going down? What would separate those two, the existing property from the two new properties?
Sorry, this is the oh, sorry, I thought you asked for the previous
yes.
refuse scheme on the site. So this previous refuse scheme would have resulted in the loss of there's some trees down the left-hand side, which it would have resulted in harm to them and lost them. The current proposal, as you can see here, those trees below Unit 1 on this application to the, I think it's southwest of Unit 1, they would be retained on the site, separating Unit 1 from number 47.
So that kind of boundary of trees between 47 and Unit 1, that pretty much remains, does it?
Yeah, the previous image, this plan here, all the green trees on there would remain. This is a proposed block plan. The trees that would be lost are the ones with the red stars on this plan here.
Okay.
Yes, I hear everything that Councillor Ward and Councillor Mirrlees said. And far be it from me not to speak up for the environment, but I don't actually think that this is a bad application, all things considered. I thought the other one was horrific, partly because it had those cars right in your face. And Shortheath Road, even in this part, is still a green area. I agree there are some more parking vehicles on the roadside now at this particular part of Shortheath Road. But I actually think this is an acceptable use of this piece of land. Obviously, we didn't want the trees to go last time, nor did we want that rather ugly parking arrangement, although it did follow the pattern of the cottages, which is, I think, what the applicant was trying to do. This one doesn't do that. But from the street scene point of view, you'll have a step, won't you, from 43 to 47. You know, it slightly steps nearer. And from the street scene point of view, I think it will probably be an improvement because the bungalow has been in disrepair for some time, or not a thing of great beauty. I agree you've got to have the parking, but that seems to be there. We're maintaining the trees. I don't like it. I'd rather have no houses there, but we need houses. We have to put them somewhere, and we have to, as Councillor Mooley said, look after the environment at the same time. But we have a housing target, and quite frankly, if we have an application which tries desperately hard to maintain much of the greenery on site, then I feel I will support the officers on this one.
Councillor Dixon.
Just looking at these two, what I don't understand about this application is that this was a bungalow, obviously used for people who were in retirement before it was redeveloped, and now it looks like it's got small houses. Why can we not put in place housing which would be suitable for an older population like other retired people as opposed to family housing? I just wondered.
It's a good question, but not really a planning issue, I'm afraid. But anyway, Councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't mind the housing. I think I concur with Councillor Coburn. However, it confuses me with that garage, and I am concerned about problems later. Why do we have to have the two garages in the centre of this diagram? The one on the left, of course, is feeding Unit 1. So when Unit 1 drive round there, their headlights can go straight into Unit 2 late at night. If there's any noise, they're quite close to the building. I am concerned that we are building some sort of problem in for later use over noise and light pollution against Unit 2. To me, the garage number 1 is in the wrong place.
Councillor Clark. Yes.
Thank you, Chairman. I know this address very well, and if you look at what's there at the moment and compare with what we see on the screen there, this is miles better. Thank you.
I'd like you to come again. Councillor Hunt?
Yeah, so I just wanted to say I agree with Councillor Coburn and Clark. I think you know, the overdevelopment is obviously a concern, as is the protection of the natural habitat. But to me, looking at these two units and looking at the road and the number of properties that are on the road, personally, I can't see how this could be considered to be overdevelopment, and I would support it.
Okay. Does any other councillor wish to speak? Then move to the recommendation, which is that subject to conditions 1 to 20 and informatives 1 to 10, permission be granted. Those in favour?
That's 9 in favour.
And those against?
4 against.
Any abstentions?
And 1 abstention.
And 1 abstention. Okay, well, therefore, it is granted. Okay. Right. Onwards we go. Only 3 more to go. Right. The next application is not subject to public speaking, and I'll start with, in fact, 2019-0116, land centred coordinates 482312 145 552, River Lane, Farnham. The proposal is erection of 2 day rooms, stables and use of land for stationing of additional 4 mobile home pitches, together with the formation of additional hard standing as amended by floor plan and additional information received 30th of July 2019. I'll ask Rachel Kellis, please, to present the case.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. I'll start. We've got the location plan for you outlined on screen. On the left-hand side, you'll see that the application site line is outlined for you in red, and there is a further blue line which denotes the full ownership of the applicant on screen. You'll see from these maps that the site sits just to the south of the A31 dual carriageway, and you'll also see there's an existing access which goes on to River Lane. The nearest residential property in this case is situated just here, and that's a distance of over 60 metres from the edge of the red sight line to that nearest neighbouring property. Here you'll see an aerial photograph and existing site plan. This is the existing access which comes off River Lane, leading into the application site. You'll see there's existing hard standing on site where there is one existing lawful pitch on the site, and there are existing stables which are the subject of this application but are already in place on the site. You'll notice well that the boundary just below the site along here, you'll see it's quite well vegetated and there's a number of trees which run alongside it. Before I go into the detail of the proposal, I just wanted to give a bit more background in terms of what is the definition of a mobile home or static caravan. Mobile homes or static caravans can still be defined as a caravan, but can be of a similar size to a bungalow. You see I've got two photos at the bottom which show you some examples of those. The definition relates to a structure, and so there's no description as to what that structure might look like, and there's no requirement that the structure has to compromise one with wheels. You'll see there's one example on the bottom right where you can see the wheels on it, but you won't see that on the left-hand side, so you won't always see wheels on a mobile home. Owners of the land can change those caravans without having to get a new permission. So what's applied for in this case is the use of the land rather than the structure itself. And that's just provided that the caravan or structure meets that definition. What you'll see on site, I haven't read through the description in full for you, but you'll see that there are maximum dimensions there that each caravan would have to meet. And there are two examples below which would meet that requirement. Quite often the sites, those sorts of structures can be divided in two and lifted away on the back of a vehicle in terms of being led from site. And you'll also quite often see smaller touring caravans, which are more typically what you see as attached to the bottom or attached and towed on the back of a vehicle on the road. To meet the definition of a gypsy traveller, household members need to demonstrate that they travel for work purposes and stay away from their usual place of residence when doing so, but also includes those who have ceased to travel temporarily due to factors such as education, ill health, old age, for a few examples there. Turning back to the proposal itself, this is the proposed block plan for you on screen here. What is proposed is 4 additional mobile home pitches, positioned just here. So they include spaces both for static caravans and associated touring caravans. In terms of built form, the proposal includes 2 new day rooms. Those are shaded in grey on the screen. You'll see the larger one here. That would be a shared day room, which would serve the new mobile home pitches, and a further smaller day room just here. The proposal also seeks retrospective permission for the stables which are already in place. Turning to some more detailed plans, the day room 1 is the smaller of the 2 day rooms which we've seen, and those are the plans for that building on the left-hand side of the screen here. That includes the floor plan, the elevations, and the roof plan just there. So that would serve a single pitch. That's got a 16 square metre footprint and a height of 3 metres. In terms of the stables, as noted, they are already in place on site, and so there's a photograph of those for you just here. And you'll also see the relevant elevations just above. You'll note that the appearance and scale of those stables is fairly consistent with rural stables and outbuildings that you might see elsewhere and are typical of countryside locations such as this. To give you an idea on dimensions, you've got a 70 square metre footprint for that building, 2.9 metres in height, about 11.3 metres in width. Turning to the larger of the 2 day rooms, this would be a communal day room used by the proposed 4 pitches. In terms of dimensions for this day room, you're looking at a square footprint of about 154 square metres, and you've got a height of 4.72 metres. Turning to some of the existing photographs of the site. This is standing on along the access road looking towards the stables, which are just to the rear. You'll see an existing example of a static mobile home, which is just here. On the top right-hand side is looking towards the access out of the site, so we've stood really back to the stables, and you'll see one of the existing mobile homes on the left-hand side just there. You'll note that the majority of the site you'll see is covered by a gravel surfacing, and you'll also note that the boundaries are fairly well vegetated on all the boundaries. Turning to the planning considerations, the key issues in this case are considered to be the need for gypsy and traveller accommodation in the borough, the impact on visual amenity and landscape, and the impact on residential amenity. You will note from the agenda report that it does identify some visual harms to the countryside beyond the green belt, albeit modest, and that's resulting from the increase in the size of the site to accommodate the additional pitches. That does not automatically mean, however, that the application should be refused, and as a decision maker there is a requirement to undertake a planning balance exercise, and those adverse impacts need to be balanced against the benefits of the application. As the council is currently unable to demonstrate a 5-year supply of gypsy and traveller sites, and we don't have an up-to-date current site allocations to address that matter, a tilted balance needs to be applied when you are looking at this application. In this case, that means that permission should be granted unless any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the relevant policies. In this case, the identified harm that officers identify is some modest visual harm to the landscape. However, that needs to be balanced against the benefits of providing those additional pitches on site. If I can now turn your attention to the update sheet. You'll note on that update sheet there are some supplementary comments from the Highway Authority that just provides some further information behind their recommendation, which is to raise no objections subject to conditions. You will see there are amendments to conditions 3 and 6. The amendments are changing the trigger points at which those conditions bite. So they relate to contaminated land and to landscaping, and the requirement is that they are required prior to the construction of the 2 day rooms. There's an additional informative in respect of sill. And I also have a verbal correction to the recommendation A, which I'll now read the corrected version in full for you, which is that subject to the completion of an appropriate legal agreement and a satisfactory appropriate assessment being completed in respect to the Thames Basin Heaths SPA, amended conditions 3 and 6 on the update sheet, conditions 1, 2, 4, 5 and 7 to 10 on the agenda report, that permission be granted. Apologies, your agenda sheet only makes reference up to condition 7, however that should read up to condition 10, so all the conditions you saw on the agenda report are retained. There's a recommendation B on your agenda as well, that covers the eventuality that the Thames Basin legal agreement is not completed within the appropriate period. Thank you, Chairman.
Right, thank you very much. I think I said at the beginning that I did know the neighbour who is in Castleward, who is Mr. Aston, and I'm aware there's been some difficulties here. I don't think it's been very helpful. This is a retrospective application, to be quite honest with you, but I can understand the reason why that happened. Okay. I would point out to people, obviously you have your own case, that if one's minded to refuse this application, you have to have good planning reasons to do so. And there are a number of conditions there, and I would just say that if it is granted, then all conditions have to be met. Anyway, councillors.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't think we've got any reason at all to refuse this. You know, we've got a shortage of pitches, we've got the tilted balance. I can't think of a single planning reason that would stand up anywhere if we were to refuse this. I think the landscaping condition and all those other conditions really must be imposed strongly, you know, to minimise the impact. But I really don't think, given the situation, that we have any planning grounds whatsoever on which to refuse this.
Councillor Dixon.
Could you give us a little bit more background on how you came up with day room 2? How is this? How is this? Did we end up with this design?
The design, thank you for the question. Primarily, of course, the application is put forward and designed by the applicant. But in terms of some rationale, obviously you do have one larger building, whereas typically you might see smaller 4 individual units for each pitch. In this case, it's considered by the applicant that the pitches were likely to be occupied by family members, so therefore they felt it appropriate and had the desire for that one larger building. In officers' view, that does remain acceptable. It remains a sort of single-storey height that you typically associate with those pitches and consolidates the built form in one location. And that's the reason for the recommendation.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. This site has been the subject of a previous application which was refused but then overturned on appeal. And I'd just like to read, if I may, a couple of sentences from the inspector's report. And I quote, "The unmet need for gypsy sites, the lack of policy provision and the visual effect all lead to the conclusion that this is a suitable location for gypsy site of a single family." Secondly, the residual adverse effect of the development in the countryside is more than outweighed by the need for gypsy sites and the failure of policy to provide for that need. So I'm of a mind to support this application. Thank you.
Wish to speak? Oh yes, Councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just ask how many families will this support now?
Thank you for the question. It will depend on sort of size of households that come in, but you could have up to 4 households, sorry, up to 5 households, because there's one existing on site, and up to a further 4. But that does depend on the rate of occupation. You might have multiple family members living across multiple sites, but certainly we're likely to be counting that as 5 households on the site. That's a net gain of 4 over the existing permitted state.
Councillor Edmund.
Thank you, Chairman. I might not be able to get an answer to this question, but it's reported that the relatively small-scale proposal is not considered to lead to a high number of vehicle movements. How was that being determined that there's a relatively small number of vehicles? In other words, what analysis has the highways done to determine that frequency of vehicle movement?
Thank you for the question. I believe the reference to their judgment relatively small refers to the fact that the proposal is not of a number where it triggers a major application. It's not considered therefore to have potentially major transport impacts where you might have additional requirements on site. Certainly what they've looked at is the visibility for the existing access and the potential safety of vehicles turning into that. And it is on that basis that they've recommended to us that the proposal is acceptable subject to conditions and that the impact on highway safety would, in their view, professional view, be acceptable in this case.
Thank you.
Councillor Hess.
Whoops. Nearly. 9.5, impact on residential amenity. If I can just quickly read it. The application site is well separated from the nearest neighbouring dwellings. There would be a separation distance of 60 metres from the site to Homely, Alton Road. Given the relatively modest scale of the individual buildings, as well as the transient and single-storey form of caravans, officers are satisfied there will be no material adverse impacts on neighbouring residential dwellings. Well, the nearest neighbouring property is Homely, and the separation distance is quoted here as 60 metres or perhaps a bit more. I'd just like confirmation that the separation distance would be, and I know it's not part of this application as marked in red, but just that the separation distance land would be for grazing horses, but not for parking caravans or building structures. Can that be confirmed?
Thank you. Yes, it can be. The permission considered tonight is solely relating to land inside that red line. The remainder of the space between the two properties, this is a neighbouring property just here. You'll see it outlined in yellow. It's in excess of 60 metres, this distance between the two. That's agricultural land, so you wouldn't need permission for things like grazing horses. That would be an agricultural use, but anything else like stationing vehicles or a change of use would require separate permission in its own right, and was that we have the control in that respect through further applications.
Yes, Councillor Dixon.
Yeah, I apologise for coming back to this again. I think this is a very nice plan. I'm just concerned about the day room 2 design. It's lovely, obviously it's nice, but I'm just counting the bathrooms here. In the last one we looked at, we had one house which had 3 bathrooms in, and here we've got at least 5 caravans, and we've got 3 bathrooms. Is that right? Of this planning, sorry.
Joe.
Thank you. We do seek advice from our private sector housing manager. They have to apply for a licence from them for all the caravans on site, so they do have a view to the accommodation, standard of accommodation being provided, and they certainly raised no objection. Certainly there is space if the need requires to provide additional bathrooms. You can make internal changes to that day room should that be required, and there's a space to do so if that need arises in the future. However, we're broadly satisfied that it does provide a suitable standard of accommodation for the occupants.
The council wishes to comment? No? No. Okay, well, I'll just make one final comment, actually, if I may. I find this application very difficult to deal with, quite frankly. I would say, but I would stress, that if we refused it, then it's almost certainly, if it went to appeal, then almost certainly we would lose the appeal, and we'd be obviously faced with costs. However, I would stress that if we do approve this tonight, then it must be that all conditions as specified here should be adhered to entirely. I think that's the very strongest thing I can say at this point in time. And in fact, I would point in particular to condition 9. But there we are. Sorry? Yeah, make sure it is. And that's a matter, again, for enforcement. Okay. So, the revised recommendations is that subject to completion of an appropriate legal agreement in respect of the Thames Basin East Spa by the 10th of March 2020, and subject to conditions 1, 2, 4, 5, 7 to 10 on the agenda report, and amended conditions 3 and 6 on the updates report, and informatives 1 to 6 on the agenda report, and informatives 7 on the update report, permission be granted.
In favour, thank you.
Against? Abstain? No. Also, recommendation B is that in the event that the requirements of recommendation A are not met, and I'll repeat that, that's the 10th of March 2020, that permission be refused. Those in favour?
All in favour, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, okay, well, don't worry, we don't bite. I don't think so, anyway.
Thank you, Chairman. This application seeks planning permission for the erection of a single-storey extension following the demolition of an existing conservatory. There are no updates since the writing of the report. So the application site is located in red. So 45 Larkfield Road is an end plot of a private cul-de-sac within the Farnham built-up area boundary. As you can see from the proposed block plan, the proposed extension would be in the same footprint as the existing extension. Here you can see from the photographs of the site, the existing conservatory that will be replaced. Photograph A is from the rear, and photograph B is taken from the western side of the existing conservatory. So it can be seen from the proposed rear elevation that the proposed and existing are of near identical dimensions. The proposed extension would be of a more modern design with grey aluminium finishes instead of the existing white finish. Here you can see again that the proposed extension is of the same footprint as the existing. And matter consideration, the matter planning judgment relate to the impact on visual amenity and character and the impact on residential amenity, taking into account the single-storey height, position at the rear and design of the extension, the impact on character would be acceptable. And being of near identical bulk and mass, the proposed situation would not be materially different from the existing situation and would therefore be acceptable with regards to residential amenity. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Coburn.
Thank you very much. Very clear. Thank you. This is here because there's what should we say? Let me get it absolutely accurate. The agent's related to a member of staff. It would normally not come anywhere near this committee, and quite frankly, it shouldn't, but we know why it's here. If anybody has anything to say on this, other than the fact that it was a very clear presentation and nothing changes, I would be very surprised.
Does any other councillor wish to speak? No.
Great improvement. I support it.
Right, anybody else want to speak, or shall we move to the recommendation? Move to the recommendation, shall we? Okay, the recommendation is that subject to conditions 1, 2 and informative 1, permission be granted. Those in favour?
One abstention.
Isn't it? Thank you, Carl. 1-0 up. Yes, 1-0 up already, okay. Okay, right. Item for tonight. Item B3, 2019-0996, P8 Cottage? No, 35 Jubilee Lane, Farnham, GU 1040A, erection of extension and alterations to roof following demolition of existing garage and conservatory. Ruth, you're finally on.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. Firstly, I'd just like to draw members' attention to the written update sheet that was circulated. It really just corrects a typo, so includes a crucial not that was omitted from a sentence in the report, and it also adds an additional informative to the officer's recommendation. So if I can turn to the details of the planning application. The application site comprises attached residential dwelling in the built-up area of Farnham. The aerial photograph here provides you a bit more context. The area is residential in character, and there are a mix of property types that are generally detached and 2-storey. Here are some site photographs. Photograph A shows the property, which is here from the street. The property is a bungalow, as you can see. Photograph B shows the property from within the driveway, with the front door here. And photograph C just gives you an indication of the relationship of the property to the nearest neighbour. And I have outlined in the report, you'll see some windows on this elevation, and I provided some details in the report as to what those windows serve and the impact of the proposed development on those windows, and I'll pick that up in a bit more detail towards the end. So these photographs are taken from within the site, so this is just taken across the existing rear elevation, and this is looking down the side elevation, and that's the property that I've just mentioned in the background. So the application has come before committee because the applicant is a member of staff, and the proposal is to increase the height of the dwelling to take it from single-storey to two-storey, and in addition to that there'll be a mix, there'll be some extensions outside the existing footprint which are a mix of single-storey and two-storey, and these extensions are indicated here and here. And this is an existing conservatory that would be removed. This block plan also shows that there would be a tree of heaven that would be removed from the site to make way for the extensions, but the trees in proximity to the boundary on the northern boundary and eastern boundary would be retained. So these show you the proposed elevations, so you can see that effectively we go from a single storey to a two-storey dwelling. There's a mix of two-storey extensions, single-storey extensions, and a sort of chalet type extension in the northeast corner of the site. Also to note that due to the relationship of the neighbouring property, in the photo that I showed you earlier, officer suggesting that this window here and this window here would be obscurely glazed for matters of privacy. So this shows you the ground floor and the first floor of the proposal. So the main bulk of the extensions would be here, and there's I've just highlighted here that this is a single-storey extension. There's a two-storey element here, and then I did reference that sort of chalet-style element with a garage and a dormer above when we looked at the elevations. So the key considerations are the impact on visual amenity, and whilst it is going from a bungalow to a two-storey house, two-storey dwellings are typical of the area. There's quite a mix of development, and so it would be acceptable and appropriate within its context. In terms of the impact on residential amenity, the distance from the boundaries means that there'd be no loss of light or outlook, and various windows being obscurely glazed means that there'd be no loss of privacy either. A tree of heaven would be removed, but the tree officer has said that due to its condition, that would be acceptable, and he raises no objection. And for that reason, officers are recommending approval. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, do Councillor Waverley's first.
Thank you. Just got a question. What's a tree of heaven? I mean, what is a tree of heaven? Should we be getting rid of a tree of heaven?
It sounds rather lovely, but I can't give you an exact description of it, but because I'm no tree expert. But the tree officer is very clear that it has pretty poor form, and so isn't worthy of retention.
No, that's okay. I just wondered what it was. Thanks.
Yes, I mean, this is nothing like as easy as the previous one, is it? We haven't got a street scene, have we, which is rather sad from my point of view. I'm all for getting the reports briefer and more focused, but no, that's not a street scene. That's a block plan or something, you know what I mean? Because I know Jubilee Lane, lots of people have done this. What I don't know is, fully how this is impacting on any other house. I have reservations. I don't think they're strong enough to refuse it. I don't like, as I've said hundreds of times, obscure glazing in any room that is habitable. I just don't like it. I still feel it's bad design. I don't mind in bathrooms, I'll accept that, and occasionally on a staircase, but I still don't like it. I just think it should be designed out, and we should never, ever put obscure glazing in a habitable room, even if there's another window. I just instinctively can't understand that. We're certainly giving permission here for something large, and that's why, as I say, I'd quite like to do the street scene. This used to be my route to work. I used to pick somebody up who lived on Jubilee Lane, and they were all bungalows to start with, and over the years you could see them sort of getting bigger and bigger. So certainly this is not unusual on the road itself. How well it sits in the street scene is my question, and the obscure glazing, but I don't think on balance it's enough to turn it down.
Councillor, as it is from the Ailanthus family, known as the varnish tree, a Chinese or Taiwanese fast, hardy, growing invasive species capable of out-competing native
get rid.
Species.
Actually, I've just seen a picture of it.
So I'm not so sure it's a huge loss.
No, it's not very beautiful. We've just found a picture of it. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Edmonds.
Well, I had two concerns, but one may not be significant. Essentially, I'm always concerned about glazed windows because eventually they'll then ask for the condition to be removed. I'm not sure whether I can get any assurance on that.
Thank you, Chair. So I have discussed the matter of the obscurely glazed windows with the applicant. So on the original submission, for the, let me just take to the elevation, the relevant elevation, because then we get some context. Sorry, I've managed to cut it off when I've been cutting and chopping these elevations to get them on the presentation. But this is the bedroom window, for which there is a, I take Councillor Coburn's point, but for which there is another window on the side elevation that would serve the bedroom. So on the original plan submitted, the applicants have annotated this to be obscurely glazed. The applicants are aware of the fact that we are requiring this one to be obscurely glazed, and I understand that they are happy with that. And Officer Phil, there is no need to obscurely glaze this one, given its position relative to habitable windows in the neighbouring property.
Okay, sorry, and the second point was, were everybody not declaring a climate emergency, trees would not be an issue for me. It would be helpful if we had a photograph of the tree that's going to be destroyed. Thank you.
Councillor Hess. Yes? You want to speak?
Yes. Can I ask whether obscure glazing these days has to be guaranteed to be done at the point of manufacture, in other words, permanent? And perhaps a compromise, because I hate obscure glazing. It always looks like sort of blind eyes to me. Whether the top panes could be left clear so that the people in the house could at least see the sky. Because it's really horrible being enclosed by obscure glass. But I think the permanence of the glazing would be interesting if you've got any notes on that. Thanks.
All I would say, Councillor, is if it did break the condition, then enforcement action could be taken, couldn't it? Anyway. Councillor Dixon's next. Yeah.
Just very quickly, the two windows that are going to have obscure glazing is one above the porch and one on the right-hand side. Just looking at the plan, the one above the porch, could that be a stained glass window as opposed to obscure? I mean, sorry, is that the same thing? The one in the bedroom, do we have to put obscure glassing on the bedroom? Can we not just say they can put a curtain up there? I'm sorry.
Thank you, Chair. So just to clarify, this is the bedroom window. This window here serves a landing. Under the terms of the requirements of planning, we are really looking at matters of privacy and seeking to ensure that no overlooking occurs, and we can't really, on planning grounds, require a window to be stained glass. We can only, the limits of our capabilities are that we can require it to be obscurely glazed, and the applicant is prepared to accept that. Just turning to the point about obscurely glazing up to a certain height, that is a possibility, and the standard is usually up to 1.7 metres. The The only thing I would say to that is that the central window above the porch is a landing window, and this window here serves the same landing, and the applicants have volunteered that the bedroom window is wholly obscurely glazed, and there is another bedroom to light that bedroom. So the option is open to us to limit the extent of obscure glazing, but in this particular instance, the rooms would still receive sufficient outlook, we feel.
Well, is it a possibility to make the offer to the applicant that if they wanted to have clear glazing above 1.7 metres from the floor, that they could do so? For the reasons I gave earlier, that, you know, to be able to actually see up at an angle the sky, blue sky of a day is nice. To have complete obscured windows is pretty horrible, in my view, personally. Just a question.
Yes.
That isn't the wording of the condition at the moment, and if you if there was support for amended wording to the condition, so it was only up to 1.7 metres, then it's within the committee's power to amend the wording of the condition. So that would be the most appropriate route in which to do that. I would just say that both these, there are other windows to the, one is non-habitable, accommodate, to one room that would be effective as landing, so it's non-habitable accommodation, but equally has another window, and the bedroom also has another window.
We're spending a lot of time on this, aren't we? I mean, I would say actually, you know, I think it's a very valid suggestion you've made, but I'd keep that in your locker if I were you, if you know what I mean. And I'd like to move the, can we move to the recommendation? Let's see, do unless she has a second, Councillor S. No second for Councillor S's nomination? No? Well, let's go to the recommendation. Subject to conditions 1 to 4 and informatives 1 2, plus additional information on the update report, permission be granted. Those in favour, please raise your hands. Thank you.
13.
And against? Abstentions? 1. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Right. Phew. There being no items to consider in an exempt session, so that concludes this evening's meetings. And thanks to the officers and thanks to you. Good night. Okay.
Well done. That was good.
Was it?
Wasn't that better, eh?
It was better, yes it was. I mean, a combination.